Facebook every Sunday from 5 p.m. till 7. It's the podcast about politics in Barbados, the region, and the wider world. Now, here are your hosts, Ayo and Terry.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Season 5, Episode 2 of our weekly live show, Just Politics, Our Worldview, where we discuss politics in Barbados, the region, and the rest of the world. Welcome back to all of you, our regular viewers, and those of you who are now coming in, new viewers, everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining us. If you are new to our show, please note that you can find us here live every Sunday from 5 to 7 p.m. Also, if you missed this live show, you can rewatch right here anytime after on the podcast version on YouTube each week. We are also live on YouTube if you prefer to watch at that destination. I am your host, Ayo Olalaro, with my co-host, Dr. Terry Harris. Good evening, Terry, and welcome back.
Thanks, Ayo. And welcome back, everyone. All right, so this week we will be chatting with Professor Dwayne Devonish on the topic Rethinking Education for Post-Pandemic Development. But first, a word from our sponsor. So this week's episode is brought to you by Diversification Inc. You can contact them at 624-0593 or by email at diversification@icloud.com for all your construction, renovations, and interior design needs. You can give them a call for your real estate questions, whether short-term or long-term rentals, to sell or even purchase your dream home. It's your one-stop shop for all things properties. Thank you again for joining us, and Ayo, back over to you.
Thank you. Also, please note that you can ask questions or contribute to the program with your comments. Simply type them in the comment section below. Good evening, Angela. You're my love too. Welcome. You can also WhatsApp us on 833-9886 or email us at jpoworldview@gmail.com. And also, right now, click like, click share, and please turn on your notifications. All right, so let's move right into hot topics, Terry.
What's hot this week, Ayo?
Well, the hottest thing this week, or rather what I want to talk about this week first, is I usually talk about Barbados and I leave these shirts and go over, but I'm leaving these shirts to come back this time around because I already want to talk about Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, because she is certainly the most popular Supreme Court nominee ever. The hearing to decide on her confirmation to the Supreme Court was what can ultimately be referred to as one of the strangest hearings ever. I mean, it's par for course for these Republicans, but yeah, it's crazy because it really is more or less an interview process. You know what I mean? So some of the questions that we're hearing is absolutely crazy. From Ted Cruz, questions about children's books teaching critical race theory. We have Senator Grimm illegally asking about her religion, which is like totally only question altogether. We had Marsha Blackburn asking for a definition of the word woman. You know, just these Republicans pushing the narrative. The entire questioning really was that that party, you know, displaying what most of us know anyway, that the party is petty, it's a racist, and it's very backward. They literally spent their time pandering to their base, basically, instead of asking questions that were pertinent to the actual selection process. But Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is a hero in my mind. She displayed her education. She was eloquent. She was focused. And of course, she was informed because, you know, we Black women, we got to come to the table, actually know what we're talking about. We can't come pretending. And, you know, she was also really witty with all those facial expressions that Black women learn through ancestral memory, really. And I know, like me, most of the Black women watching, you know, they recognize every single meaning behind each one of those facial expressions. And like me, they probably were squealing with laughter. Anyway, I just want to say congrats to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson on her successful hearing. And the Senate will vote on her confirmation in about 2 weeks, I think, or 3 weeks. think it's about 2 weeks, and we can basically look forward to her becoming the very first Black woman on the Supreme Court. At this point, the chamber is split evenly, as you know. So as long as the Democrats, all 50 Democrats, vote in her favor, then you will just have Vice President Kamala Harris, who will hold the tie-breaking vote. Some analysts are saying, however, that they expect some bipartisan support. So we wait and see. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Terry.
No, I think you said it perfectly. Congratulations to Justice, soon to be Justice Jackson. Of course, as you pointed out, the Republicans are deep in the culture wars.
Yeah.
As you said, pandering to their base, which, you know, this is a euphemism now for just any old Republican. It's actually quite sad for American politics, but that's what it is. Like you just pointed to, you know, we do expect her to be confirmed without much fanfare. As a Black woman, she has to come to the table correct. She has to come to the table overqualified, in fact, more than qualified. So she's aptly demonstrated that in the hearing so far. You know, we expect her to become confirmed also with bipartisan support, because 1 or 2 Republicans will definitely, I suspect, will vote for her, because, you know, she's eminently qualified. It doesn't make sense to try to hold up the process.
Well, we'll see how it goes. You know, but one of the reasons that her nomination is so important, though, to the American people and to Black people in particular, is because that she is a former public defender. And yes, she's a Black woman, but generally nominees to the Supreme Court, they tend to be former prosecutors, which means that they're on the side of the state, they're on the state side, and therefore they don't make the connections with those people who the public defenders represent, those people who are disproportionately disadvantaged in the judicial system. We find that public defenders usually provide that free service to those people, and if they care enough, they have to understand and connect to the special circumstances of those people. So from this perspective, she's seen as important to starting the process to create some change within the system. The question, however, remains is if she, as to whether she will actually be allowed to be effective. But if you know Black women, we know that they'll find a way. What do you think, Terry? Will she be allowed to be effective in that space?
Well, you know, I think you know, the Democrats are definitely going to win this battle in getting her on the court. However, the war is far from over. The liberals on the court are outnumbered. You know, there are only 3 of them on the court, and so there are a lot of cases that are coming down the pipeline. For instance, Roe versus Wade is, you know, there's a case that's going to come up to challenge that for sure. And of course, you know, other women's rights issues are going to definitely be on the chopping block with this very conservative court. So we have to wait and see. It is a momentary success. I suspect she'll be confirmed without any problem. However, the imbalance in this U.S. Supreme Court remains, and, you know, the Democrats definitely have to up their game in order to be able to get the courts in their direction, moving towards the direction sometime within our lifetime, within our lifetime.
Yeah, I read somewhere that it'll be some time before she can even write a personal opinion. It'd be like another 40 years or something. So
we'll be able to see a number of very critical cases be decided, and not in the direction that we will be happy with, to be honest with you. So yeah, so momentary success. Congrats again to Justice, or soon to be Justice Jackson. I suspect it is a, you know, important moment, particularly for Black people and Black women in particular. But, you know, there's still a lot to be done.
Yeah, let's see how it goes. And back home in Barbados, Barbados has officially opened an embassy in the United Arab Emirates. Congrats to all of us, I believe. A number of tourism products were promoted there recently. So as also the part of the opening, you know, they had a celebration and promoting tourism products, Barbadian tourism products, and so forth. So let's hope that this leads to deepening relations and economic advancement in some ways. Terry, what is this going to mean for the average person? Do we actually care about this as individuals? That's an honest question.
There's some opportunities that could come out of this, and spinning off for our businesses as well as for our our financial services sector in particular. We know that, these the United Arab Emirates, they're flush with cash. We know that for sure. And if you can get some investment into our territory from them, that will be great. So I support it, of course. But what it actually means for the individual Barbadians, yet to be seen. But it's nice to make connections, particularly to this part of the world, where they have a lot of money and perhaps can help to finance some much needed projects in our part of the world. So we'll watch the space and hope that that there is some synergies and some win-win that can come out of this new relationship with the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah. So watch that space then. Watch that space, people.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
All righty, and kudos to Pierre Motley. She has been given yet another award. This time, the World Health Organization's Director General's Medal for Global Health Leadership. The award was given in Geneva recently. It should also be noted, though, that Prime Minister Motley co-chairs the Global Leaders Group on Antimicrobial Resistance. And, this government faced a lot of criticism at home for its handling of the pandemic. But as someone who works in this tourism space, I can tell you that we often get high praise from visitors when they come here for how organized our response has been. We also get excellent reports in the international media based on how we've been handling how we handled the pandemic, especially as a poor and powerless nation. And that has to be credited to the Prime Minister and her team. Of course, he who feels it knows it. And there were things that we could have done differently, but I would have to add that, like the rest of the world, we were basically learning on the job, like Chris Sinclair, as it relates to managing a pandemic, the first in over a century. No one who's alive now has been alive during a pandemic. So all's well that ends well. We should note, however, that the pandemic is not quite over, ladies and gentlemen. The numbers have greatly reduced. We're on the back end of it. So well done to all of us for staying the course and moving past the greater hurdles. Terry?
Yep, kudos to the team. Kudos to the team. We've done well, but like you just said, we need to remain circumspect. There are always a new variants, right? I've heard recently of this new Omicron variant. So we've gone from having COVID variants, having variants of COVID variants. So the pandemic is still pretty much here with us. Thankfully, we have new tools to battle it with, like the vaccine. So get your vaccines, ensure that you protect yourself. I've had COVID. It's not nice. Despite being vaccinated, I've had it, and it's still terrible. But of course, it wasn't as bad as it probably could be, given the fact that I was vaccinated. So just make sure you protect yourself. Continue to engage in the correct type of practices that the government is asking, so that we could all remain healthy and safe.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, and congrats to Prime Minister Motley again. And let's move on to the war in the Ukraine. Moving along swiftly, we'll have Dwayne on in no time. The war in the Ukraine continues. I'm laughing because the U.S. has declared a number of war crimes are taking place. I don't know, Terry. Has the U.S. ever committed any war crimes?
My visa is up for renewal this year.
Okay.
Renewal this year.
Moving on.
But I will say this, right? Some will suggest that the recent invasions. I mean, we shouldn't laugh, because war is wrong, and war is wrong when anybody does it illegally. And I don't even think there's really much legal reasons that you can point.
There's no legal reason
for war, except for like maybe self-defense, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, it's wrong. And of course, we've had wars, a number of wars now, that are not sanctioned by the UN Security Council, and that the international individuals who are trained in international law, they tell me that makes those wars illegal.
Mm-hmm.
By definition, those illegal wars are war crimes. But I'll just leave that there. Yeah, war is wrong. we shouldn't be in the business of we should be in the business of condemning it, irrespective of who's doing it. Right now, we have a number of wars active. The war in Russia is one. The one in Ukraine is one such war, which I condemn.
Yep, and they all should be condemned.
Yeah,
and war crimes have taken place in them all.
Yep.
But it will be interesting to see, though, what the U.S. Will be able to do about the so-called war crimes. But, besides the sanctions that they've already instituted and encouraged from around the globe. Anyway, what we really should focus on, though, is that these sanctions, well, the Western media really is reporting that these sanctions have led to inflation in Russia. And that they're seeing the price of goods raising so exponentially that the government has had to warn Russians not to panic by purporting that there are enough goods for everyone. I don't know, Terry, is this just Western propaganda? What do you think?
The first casualty, they say the first casualty of war is the truth, right? Mm-hmm. So perhaps it's true, but chances are it's propaganda. Everyone's going to be up to it. Russia's going to be up to propaganda. The Ukrainians are going to be up to propaganda. Of course, America is going to want to. The Americans and the West are going to want to say, okay, well, our sanctions are having effect. But when you really think about it, Russia produces the staples, right? It produces the fundamental resources that human existence really needs. It produces food, it produces gas, energy, it produces these things. And when we look at, I was reading an article from The Economist recently, and they were looking at inflation, trying to make the same points. Inflation is running away in Russia, but inflation with respect to the staples, the necessities of life, things like gas, things like oil, things like wheat, that inflation was relatively low relative to what I am observing and what I'm experiencing here in the UK. Of course, Russia is experiencing a lot of inflation for things like cell phones and things like applications. But of course, do you need application? Do you need a cell phone to survive? You really need wheat. So I don't think things are as bad as they're trying to make it seem. Of course, they want to spin a story.
Let's be clear. Not as bad in Russia in terms of those basic resources.
Right. I don't think things are as bad there, but I don't know. I'm not there. But I'm not going to say that there is a complete pack of lives. But there is such a thing as a fog of war, and the first casualty in war is always the truth. So we don't know what's happening. We just want the war to end. I think that's what I can call for, and I would like all wars to come to an end. All forms of occupation to come to an end, whether it be in Russia, Palestine, different areas.
It's just water, Angela. The latest quarterly economic survey by the Economic and Social Research Institute really and truly has lowered its forecast for growth in the economy this year. And when we're talking about the economy, they're really looking at the global north. So they're really looking at the bigger countries right now, which of course affects us in the global south. And they've increased its outlook for inflation as a result of the ongoing war. They're now saying that inflation can peak at 8.5% this summer before averaging out across the year at 6.7%. And this is the highest rate since 1984. So this war is definitely having a negative impact on global economic activity and making inflationary pressures, which were already building, I think, due to COVID, even greater. But Terry, what does this all mean?
Well, it means inflation, right? It means increasing the cost of living. We spoke to this last time, about last week with Shane, Dr. Lowe. So yeah, it does mean that we'll see an increase in cost of living. We have the graphs up here as it pertains to crude oil, natural gas, wheat, corn, materials index. All of these things are peaking. All of these commodities are seeing historic highs. And the one that I'm really concerned about, or that concerns me the greatest at this point in time, is wheat, because right now it's planting season in Ukraine, and Ukraine is a major food basket, right? Ukraine is a major food basket, and of course, the war will be affecting the ability of farmers to plant. And of course, if farmers aren't planting at this point in time, we aren't going to be reaping close to the autumn. And this has knock-on effects now for the cost of food. Of
Mhm.
course, oil is peaking. Has backed off in recent weeks, but we can't expect there to be any massive drop in the price of oil. And of course, this has implications for a country like Barbados, where first thing we have to pay for oil, world prices, bring it in, and then everything has to be shipped to Barbados, right? So importation costs is going to be affecting, freighting costs is going to be affected by this. And of course, Barbadians have a taste for things foreign, and so we consume a lot of foreign stuff, and so we will be importing a lot of this inflation into the country. So hopefully the government's policies are effective at trying to not exacerbate the problem, maybe help to militate against runaway inflation in the country. But of course, we're importing this stuff, so we won't be just importing the inflation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And last week Shane did say that the budget should help to mitigate some of the inflation, but I'm pretty sure that he would agree that we are still going to feel a lot of it. So my
Yeah, he
question,
made that point. He made that point. Mm-hmm.
so my question is, though, I mean, in such an environment, what does this mean for governments, for incumbent governments right now going into elections and so forth? For me, this government still got another. Well, they should have another 4. They should have like 4 years still before they face another election, and things could peter out a little bit. But let's say the election was to be called again in 3 years. What could that mean for an incumbent?
Well,
I know you're not the political scientist here, but
I am not a political scientist, but I I can hazard a guess that somebody's going to have to be blamed for this, and the government's not going to want to blame itself for the increased cost of living. So they may point to Putin and say this is all Putin's fault. The problem with that is that the Barbadian people, the voting public, can't really blame. They can't punish Putin. They can punish the government, but they can't punish Putin, right? And the government of Barbados can't punish Putin either. So that to me, that's not going to be that productive. I mean, you can try it. It might be successful with some people, and you should definitely try it. But the Barbadian people can't punish Putin, and neither can the Barbadian government punish Putin. So, and you can be damn sure that the opposition will be blaming the government. So, so you can expect.
Let's not ask you next. If you were in opposition right now, what would you be doing? Because, I mean, what would you expect an opposition government in this environment?
You would expect the opposition to blame the government, right? Say it's the government's fault, blame the government, and hope that the government looks to blame somebody outside of Barbados, whom they cannot take any action against apart from speaking out against, and then hope that resonates. The blaming of the government resonates with the voting public. That's what the opposition has to try to do: pin this on the government. Well, not pin the war in Ukraine, of course, but pin the increasing prices on the government. And of course, the government has to try to blame it on somebody else, maybe Putin, like I said, maybe Russia and the war that's going on there. But I think the problem with that is that the Barbadian people probably aren't going to look to blame anyone else other than someone in Barbados. So that may lead to the government looking to blame or looking to, well, I don't know what they're going to do. But, you could maybe point at the distributors in Barbados and say, maybe, these guys are engaging in price gouging, and maybe look to pin it on them. And then as the government say, okay, well, we're going to take some steps, public. We're going to take some steps to help protect you against these unscrupulous individuals that are, price gouging. Maybe that's what the government ends up doing. Of course, a lot of it is just counterproductive. But maybe that's what happens. We'll see what happens in terms of the politics. But if inflation does take off, you can be damn sure the government will be looking to blame somebody else for it.
Or maybe they just start like having regular conversations and stuff with the public going forward, and and doing responsible thing from that perspective.
Yeah, we have a social partnership that should be meeting to address problems like these. That's what the social partnership is supposed to be for. But if the politics takes hold and the blame game begins, then that may also break down.
Yeah. Well, let's hope for the best going forward. I think you know where I stand on that.
Where do you stand?
Yeah, well, I mean, the next few couple of years should be very interesting political environment. I mean, we're focusing on all types of things right now that really and truly, you know, can Senate meet or can't the Senate meet. That's already been decided. You know, those aren't the things that that they should right now be trying to argue. The other things that they could be arguing, other things they could be pressuring the government to do, and so forth. So, you know, that's where we're at right now.
You think the opposition is going to be responsible, Ayo?
Nah,
Who's the opposition, by the way?
we don't have one.
Okay.
We have oppositions to the government, but we don't have an opposition. Since you want an answer. Well, I mean, if I was in opposition in Washington, I'll be keeping some noise. I would be arguing about whether the Senate can meet. I would be keeping some noise about some other things that are more pertinent to the people, things where people are hurting.
You should feel liberated to wear that color. Nice blouse you're wearing today.
Yes, you know, me, I was fighting to find something. I was wearing black and gray.
not wanting to reveal yourself, right?
Oh, Jesus.
Don't worry. We also have this. You also have
I can't say enough that I'm independent, but you carry on smartly.
Of course you are. Of course I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything other than that, you know. But don't worry about it. If our prime minister can wear that color,
thank you so much. Thank you so much. I can wear any color outside of election.
Of course.
Anyway, let's get Dwayne in here and get this show on the road.
All right, so next up, we have Professor Dwayne Devonish. Professor Devonish, welcome back to the show.
Hi, guys. Thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here once again.
Yeah, welcome back.
Thank you for being here, Dwayne.
Yeah, I was enjoying your review on the hot topics.
Yeah.
You had comments
between you and Terry. Yes.
You do what?
Between you and Terry.
What would you like to comment on?
Nothing at all. I have nothing to say. All education today.
Excellent response.
Everything is education.
Don't let Ayo get all like me, right? You should not let Ayo get you in trouble.
We might be in the same cell together.
All right, so this week, guys, we have again Professor Dwayne Devonish, who's of course no stranger to the show. So Professor Devonish, so Dwayne Devonish is a professor of management and organization behavior in the Department of Management Studies under the Faculty of Social Science at the University of the West Indies Cape Town campus. Professor Devonish possesses a BSc in psychology from the University of the West Indies Cape Town campus with first-class honors, of course, and a MSc and PhD in work and organizational psychology from the University of Nottingham, United Kingdom, with distinction. In 2020, he was promoted to the rank of professor at the age of 36, the second youngest person to attain this rank at the University of the West Indies Cape Town campus. Well done, Dwayne, professor. He's also currently the youngest serving professor at the university. His main areas of interest and specialization include organizational behavior and psychology, work-related stress, health and wellness, human resource management, the strategic planning. He has published extensively in these areas in both regional and international journals, conducted practical training workshops, and engaged in diverse research-based consultancies in these same areas for various organizations. He was the lead author of the National Workplace Wellness Policy of Barbados 2019, the only policy of its kind, and currently sits as a member of the National Committee on Workplace Wellness under the Ministry of Labour, Social Partnership and Relations, and the Third Sector. Professor Devonish, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
I feel like clapping after reading that. Should I be clapping?
All right.
I'm looking forward for more shows. I'm looking forward to be on more shows.
Yes,
more
definitely.
Talk shows. Okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, join us and welcome back the young professor. There's a lot happening around the globe, and you would have heard us discussing some of it during Hot Topics. We're now on the back end of the pandemic. I like to say that. I like to say, we're still in the pandemic. Yes, we are. Well, I think we are on the back end. And now we're having to deal with the economic fallout from that, and moving right into the economic fallout from the war in Ukraine. As a small, open, developing economy, there are many implications for us, and I feel like we must at this time be considering our resilience as a nation, but also at the individual level. So there's some areas that we're going to talk about today, Dwayne. And the first one I want to talk about is economic diversification. This is a buzzword. People like to always jump up in the air, call the Parliament program, write the articles. Oh, we need diversification in the economy. Nobody says what. Nobody says how. You know, it just sounds good to say because it rolls off your tongue. You know, sweet, as Bajans would say. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? What would you be advising us right now? What would you be advising the government right now? What should we be doing about this economic diversification?
Okay, well, thanks, Ayo, for that question. So I think we have to understand the favorite line of one of the financial players here about not putting all your eggs in one basket. So when we speak about economic diversification, I think it matters right here at home because we were really riding a horse with one leg for far too long. And we know exactly what that is. The tourism sector has done wonders and it will continue to do wonders for Barbados. But I think COVID-19 pandemic, the Ukraine and Russian war have all taught us that we have to move to different areas of productivity and high growth sectors. So essentially, economic diversification is about rebalancing those sectors that we haven't optimized. We spoke about green economy, and you know this is a big thing, a big proposal for the government, the current government, in terms of trying to reinvigorate this green economy, which would include an expansion of business, investment, and jobs, especially in so many areas. In fact, when you look at their recent budget, the wide cross section of incentives for those who are taking on renewable energy products and even electric vehicles. Terry, you can buy an electric vehicle imported.
Yeah.
There are incentives attached to those types of individual initiatives. Now, the thing about it, though, when we speak about economic diversification, there's a kind of a confusion that is still emerging and quite perennial in our discussion. Now, it doesn't automatically mean when we speak about economic diversification that we are completely moving away from our traditional sectors like tourism and the offshore financial sector and completely placing all of our investment and economic resources and efforts and energies in sectors that are now building. The goal here is about rebalancing the contributions of sectors across the board. So we wouldn't want a situation where, for example, tourism now is the major driver of our income or our foreign exchange. If we can find other areas within other sectors, and here's the thing, not just new sectors, you can find new investments, new areas of growth and income generation, even in the traditional sectors. So we can talk about economic diversification in the sense that we're looking to exploit new subsectors within the traditional sectors like tourism and wholesale and retail and agriculture, but also exploiting what we consider to be the new novel, quote unquote, because they would be novel to us, even though those sectors have been advanced in the developed world in terms of the investment in those new areas. And I can mention a few of those areas. We've looked at the government proposal, as I said, with the green economy. Think about the kinds of investments and the resultant jobs in those particular areas. We're looking at people who can do photovoltaic systems and installation, designers in that particular area. We need mechanics now who can treat to hybrid and electric vehicles. We're looking at a whole range of occupations that can spur out of an investment in this well-known green economy. Now, the other segment of sectors, or what I consider to be sub-economic drivers in this diversification, are also the orange economy and the blue economy, which again are long-standing proposals. In fact, I think most recently within it was the BLP's manifesto.
Yeah.
There was an articulation of how they're going to go about investing in the blue economy and creating jobs, even in that area, maritime jobs. These new jobs in these new subsectors of the blue economy, and even new jobs within the traditional sector, because as you know, there's a natural linkage between blue economy and tourism services, like the cruise industry and the yacht industry and so on. So they're actually looking to really expend significant investment, all right, in terms of stoking the blue economic sectors. But don't forget, we have an orange economy. So we have all these colors going about in this diversification portfolio that we hopefully we can implement well. And the orange economy, as you know, will speak to the creative arts and the creative industries. And I think if you look internationally, there have been significant innovations and advances in things like gaming and animation and software development, Terry. You know, you like your games and so forth. So when we think about the orange economy, it's not simply just festivals and events and craft. And all these things are still critical because they're part of our culture, but also recognizing that we have to embrace the new innovations in the orange economy and recognize that there is that link between ICT and all of the other sectors I mentioned, from green economy, the blue economy, and right now I'm talking about the orange economy in terms of digital arts, how people can create digital products and export those products and so forth. So there's a lot of potential when it comes to economic diversification. And just going back to your question, Ayo, you mentioned about recommendations. How can we get this stoked? How can we get these sectors running? Well, I mean, Terry mentioned it. I think the social partnership, which has been a long-standing structure, which we've all benefited from for years, where employers, as we call capital, labor, and government, sit down and chart out a path, a national development path that leverages these particular sectors, that considers what are the types of investments, and where there are investments, they must be accompanied by sensible and attractive incentives. And that's where the government meets private sector, because if we want to drive this under what we call a private sector led development strategy, it means that government comes in as an enabler by providing those incentives and those policies that would allow for that growth to take place quite easily and seamlessly.
Were you missing a lot of this, all the recent budget, a lot of the promises from the manifesto in terms of, building out these economies? Was a lot of this missing in the recent budget? I feel like it concentrated primarily on photovoltaic, on the houses and the cars. But outside of that, especially with all the conversation leading up to the election on youth and youth involvement and the economy and so forth, with a lot of this missing from the recent budget, in your estimation?
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of things. I mean, I can spell out a number of things that were missing from the budget. And I think when you look at the budget was, I think, government's way of trying to deal with what they consider to be the more immediate shocks to the system. So that's why you would see the kinds of proposals and initiatives that they prioritize in that budget. Now, I always believe that these things represent a graduated or phased approach. I would expect to see all of these different things that we're going to talk about today within a single budget. Okay, as you know, government would have to plan over a 5, 10, 15-year period to get a lot of these things actually in place, because as I said, economic diversification is not something that can happen overnight. But let me just say, the good thing I would say about the budget is that it sets a lot of the first drivers in terms of getting where we want to go, especially with respect to the green economy. I'm seeing some concessions for those within the blue and the orange economy within that budget proposal, those budget proposals and so on. So it is a promising one, but it would never be sufficient.
Terry, anything before I move on to the next?
Sure. On the same point of economic diversification, Professor Devonish, what role does education now play? Because we're trying to combine the two. What role does education, how should we go about rethinking education in the post-pandemic environment so as to lead to this greater economic diversification?
I'm happy that you brought that question. I've actually coined a particular term known as educational diversification, because oftentimes, and perhaps I guess those proponents of economic diversification, how it's actually brought, it seems to be on a one-sided perspective, in the sense that when you look at the economic movement of any country, there are two things that occur. So you have supply of labor, which represents the pool of your human resources who are either employed or unemployed looking for job. And the second end is the business side or the employer side, which we call the demand side, where there's where the creation of jobs and opportunities are in place. Now, remember, when we speak about economic diversification, a lot of the sexy talk comes on the side of the investment of these new opportunities and jobs. So we're talking about, we want jobs in the green economy, we want all of these jobs in the blue economy and so forth. But here's the problem. For us to have an efficient labor market system, you have to have people, not just people, but people with the skills that are not far removed from those particular types of jobs. Mm-hmm. So you want what I call an alignment between the supply of labor, the skills that we have in the labor market, and the actual jobs that we are saying that are actually being created for those particular labor pool resources to fill. And it is unfortunate that we haven't done on that side, as what we're talking about, the labor supply side, which is where the educational diversification comes in. We haven't done a good enough job to ensure that we have a local supply of human resources who can occupy these spaces. What effectively happens is that we have a lot of graduates, we have a lot of people coming out of technical, vocational, general educational programs looking for jobs in the economy, but then there's that mismatch between the skills that we are seeing being occupied within the labor pool and the jobs that employers are pushing and, of course, demanding that they have labor that can actually fill those roles. So education, when we talk about educational diversification, we're talking about something very close to my heart, and that is curriculum reform, the reform curriculum.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the jobs you think that are going to become obsolete within the next few years, within the next decade or so?
Well, I don't have an inventory of those jobs, but if you could think about it, one of the things that we know for certain, a lot of the professors have been relying on manual operations in particular. And I'm not talking about just factory jobs, I'm talking about office jobs, technical, administrative jobs, professional jobs that rely heavily on manual operations. You've realized that there's been a complete shifting away to digital and ICT supported jobs environment. So it may not necessarily be that for a lot of these traditional manual operating jobs that they disappear, but you will find that the requirements shift. And those jobs then are redesigned, which then requires now a new set of labor with different types of skills that are commensurate with digital literacy, ICT competence, and the likes. So we're looking at how education can be a laggard in this whole economic diversification process. In fact, educational reform has to be forefront if economic diversification is going to happen. So if we're going to see shifts and movements from, as I said, those manual operating jobs to more digital jobs, it means that the education sector has to reflect those kinds of programming. The kinds of skills that are needed would then have to be infused in the various types of courses and subject offerings that we have now across from, I would say, from even pre-primary up to tertiary.
If only someone thought of bringing ICTs and technology to students in primary and secondary school like 20, 30 years ago. If only. And
we would have this problem with COVID. But if you think about it, if we had the foresight, yes, if we had that foresight.
EduTech?
We had EduTech. You know what went wrong there? I think there were a number of reports that would have would have shown a lot of the problems, the perennial issues that we've had in terms of implementing those types of projects. But you're correct, Terry. And think about it. When was the last time we had what I consider to be a major curricular overhaul in terms of looking at our pre-primary, which is early education, up to reception, or primary, secondary, post-secondary reform? We have not had a significant overhaul and reform in our curriculum. And that says a lot, because if we're going to talk big about changing these types of jobs and transforming the economy by exploring new sectors, but our people don't have exposure or access first to these types of programs that can give them these skills to qualify for the jobs, what do you think will happen? You would have a labor market where there's a glut of jobs that can't be filled, and equally a glut of workers who remain unemployed. Well, potential workers, who remain unemployed because they don't have the skills to match the jobs, okay, that are out there in the market. So you can have a situation where you have a lot of jobs in the labor market, but still high levels, sustained levels of unemployment because of that potential mismatch between supply and demand within the market system. So that's where the education system, as I said, it needs to come to fore. But I want to talk a little bit. I mean, I'm not sure if you have any more questions, but I really want to talk a little bit on the curriculum issue in terms of how we go about review.
Yeah, we can go into that topic, because that's the next topic that was going to come anyway. And we may come back a little bit to this educational diversification. It's heavy. Education diversification.
Yeah, I kind of coined that. I mean, probably I stole it for someone else, but I kind of came up with that.
You're making it popular.
You can't have economic diversification without educational diversification.
Yeah, and I agree. To a point, because I feel like, okay, I mean, for some time, before we move on to the curriculum, for some time, and I'm not that old, but I'm not that young either. And there's been a talk from the time I was in my, let's say, 1920. There was the conversation around the idea that certain jobs are going to be obsolete within the next 10 years. And all those jobs are still around. Now, I like what you said earlier, because what you said was, it's not that these jobs are going to become obsolete, but they're going to change.
The requirements,
right? The requirements for them are going to change. The way of doing the job is going to change. Therefore, what we should really be doing is retraining our people, right? To do the same job, but do it differently and do it more efficiently and effectively for a 21st century operation, basically. So I don't know if you want to say anything else on that, but that's how I feel about that whole thing. Like, even now, there are people who are thinking, I need to find something else to do. I hear a lot of people talking about getting a skill and so forth, because what they're doing right now, they feel as though they're sitting ducks, basically.
Yeah.
For changing the world. So should they be really concerned? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. Remember, as I said, for matching between supply and demand in the labor market, it suggests that we need people in the labor market who carry particular skills that are clearly commensurate with the jobs that are being pushed or advanced in the economy. Now, as you correctly said, there are people who would have been trained years ago, 10, 20 years ago in a particular area or within a particular set of skills. But then they realize that these skills are no longer relevant. And now they need to have access to educational programs or educational opportunities that would allow them to either reskill or upskill to now be employable or attractive for those types of jobs. And as they are absorbed into those jobs, they can feel confident that they can perform those particular jobs and the required tasks and duties to the best of their ability. Now, the other thing that I want to mention, which is very critical about the notion of how these people are absorbed into particular jobs, is the fact that a lot of educational, you would imagine, a lot of education programs, and I'm going to start right as early as primary and secondary and into post-secondary, as I said, have not actually undergone any significant review and reform exercise. And what that suggests, as I said, is that the educational curricula across the system then remains a laggard against what the economic diversification, or what we consider to be the fancy buzzword economic transformation of the country is. So you would always have that situation where you're having a lot more jobs. The jobs are being created there, but they're not being filled. And guess what? An employer goes, as we've seen in the newspaper, looking for labor outside, because you will see an ad, because we cannot find a mixologist, or we can't find.
That's it.
I've actually seen an ad like that, but you get the point.
Seen it, yeah.
And you see a lot of employers now,
levels to that.
Exactly, recruiting from outside, because according to their vantage point, there is not the sufficient pool of labor with the skills that can occupy the spaces that they have in the form of jobs. So that's the problem. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I don't want to be Robert Rosa, so yes.
I mean, this is something that has even affected a lot of countries I've worked with. It's in Vincent and the Grenadines. There's a major complaint when it comes to employers believing, for some reason, that there's a lack of skills, or there's a skills shortage in the economy, and as a result, it is a force for them to go outside to fill their jobs, or at least what we consider to be their senior or top level jobs, so to speak.
And it levels to that. You're talking about the secondary school system, the curriculum really from primary school straight up. And you kept saying, that nothing has been done here for however long. I would agree with that. I don't know why we're still putting children to do religious knowledge as a CXC. I feel like it's a waste of resources, in my opinion. I feel strongly like we should be entering more people for art. I feel we should be entering more people for theater arts, and these different skills that we don't see because of our limited view of the world, that we don't see as important. We have people there's a guy on TikTok right now who is a multi-millionaire and has never spoken a single word, right? In my opinion, he's a theater artist. Do you understand the point I'm making? Yeah, he just comes in and he does, somebody's doing something stupid and he does it the right way, the easy way. He made like 3 million during the pandemic. And that's all he does on TikTok. You understand what I'm saying?
It's an income earner for him.
Exactly. So I mean, are we focusing too much on the wrong? I understand the core subjects, like you need math if you're gonna be a computer engineer. You need math. You need the basics. You need to focus on these things. But do we downplay some of the other subjects too much? Upplay some of the others, like where we religious knowledge, as I said before, we can do without that right now. Others may disagree. I feel that's a personal thing.
Yeah,
we need to enter more people into the arts. We need to enter more people into certain other subjects. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yes, we can. And I just want to kind of background that behind what we have to understand what curriculum review is, or reform actually is. So when we think about curriculum, there are two key things that I like to talk about. So curriculum is what we teach, what, the content, the subject areas, the offerings, the objectives and learning outcomes. But it is just as much as not what we only teach, but how we deliver our education. And if you look at the what, you're actually, that's exactly what you're touching on. There's a need for incorporating new areas of content. And of course, these areas have to be linked to, as I said, those new sources of economic activity that is inherent in this narrative that we're calling economic diversification. Now, you're correct. The arts, especially creative activities, I think these were particular subjects that were not given sufficient attention in the curriculum. And I think, and I'm happy to report, though, that the Ministry of Education has recognized that culture, arts, or what we consider to be the creative activities or curriculum of creative programming in the curriculum are now going to be part and center of curriculum from primary and secondary school. So it gives that opportunity for students to learn different types of skills that they can leverage into the orange economy. I always believe, Ayo, that entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship related skills and competencies should be embedded in the curriculum as early as primary school. I think technical vocational skills the same way. And if you're talking about the green and the blue economy, think about it. A large catchment of jobs in those particular economies are going to require significant technical and vocational skills. So we might not want to wait too late in the post-secondary phase where people do, their CVQs in post-secondary or in what you call advanced secondary system. We may want to have those technical vocational skills being embedded in the curriculum as early, as I said, as the primary school. We've spoken about digital literacy, ICT related skills. All of those things have to come to the fore in any curriculum reform now. There's another, I think I would say one of my pet peeves though, when it comes to curriculum reform is the fact that we haven't done for a long time consider the importance of critical reasoning and analytical skills.
Yeah.
They're absolutely critical, because when you have students who are transitioning now from secondary school into the workplace, employers are demanding not just those technical skills or technical qualifications, but they want students to have that critical reasoning and analytical capacity to be able to make decisions, high-level decisions, to take on, important strategic initiatives in the company that require those types of competencies. But let's not forget soft skills.
Which is why I don't understand why we focus a lot on English A, but we don't necessarily focus a lot on English B, which is it called again? English Lit.
Literature, yeah.
We don't enter enough students, I think, in English literature. I think we should enter a lot more. It's not about learning Shakespeare and stuff. It's about learning to reason. It's about learning to argue, and these types of skills that are critical, even if you go into an ICT environment, regardless of where you go. I think that's a critical skill that they can learn through English Lit. But you continue, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. I mean, you need critical reasoning, analytical skills in every level and in every dimension of a job.
Yep.
When you think about it, whether you're a sanitation officer or you are senior executive at Massey, you need critical reasoning and analytical skills. But I wanted to mention something that, again, I is a major hobby horse of mine, and that is the soft skills training.
Yeah.
That component of the curriculum that was, of course, missing for a long time in our existing structures. We need people who occupy jobs, not with technical skills alone, but with what I call social cognitive abilities. That is communication. You can be a very good HR manager, you're technically speaking, or a very good carpenter, or you can be a very good electrician, but you can't communicate to customers. You can't solve problems. You're not emotionally intelligent. You can't work with groups or teams. You can't lead an organization.
Next Sunday show deals a lot with that topic, but you continue.
Yes, no, soft skills are absolutely essential. I've actually done a survey in 2020. I went down to St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 2020 to do one of the first ever labor demand surveys. And that's a survey that assesses employers in St. Vincent and Grenadines, their preferences and demand for the different types of skills. And guess what? The survey revealed that even more so than technical skills, employers in St. Vincent and the Grenadines are looking for these soft skills. They're saying that we're getting people who are architects, we're getting electricians, we're getting people who are managers who are coming out with first-class honors in business and in sciences, but they can't communicate, they can't solve problems, they can't work with people, they can't interface with customers, they're not emotionally intelligent. And I think that again, that's reflective of their absence within the general curriculum, not just within the St. Vincent and the Grenadines example, but across the Caribbean, even here in Barbados. It is only now that we are talking about soft skills, and I always make the joke in my training when I talk about soft skills and I deliver these training workshops to different audiences, that, you know what, I don't know why they're called soft skills, because they are the hardest skills to know and to retain. And in fact, right now, as I said, the employers in St. Vincent and Grenadines are highly demanding these skills. These skills are in high demand now. So they don't just want CSCs. They want to know that on your CV or in a demonstration of an interview, or when you come on probation in a job, that you can demonstrate these skills above and beyond what you technically know. And I think if we can infuse soft skills, in particular, as early as the pre-primary level, you know, I mean, we talk about pre-primary, we're talking about those very, very young children, 3 to 5. Trust me, this is going to redound to the benefit of not just the child or the student, the learner who's progressing through the system, but to teachers, the educational system, to the players in the economic sectors, employers, everyone. So I think it is something that needs to be done.
Before we go off this topic, though, Terry, sorry, just because I know I talk.
Go ahead.
But I want to ask: should employers be rethinking what they consider a qualified candidate for a job? Is this a part of the issue? Because sometimes employers, they want you to have an MBA or MSc or what have you. For a particular job, and of course that means you're technically trained for the job. Yeah.
Yes.
What I've found, I read an article some years back, and I've never forgotten it. Where Fortune 500 companies were actually hiring people with degrees like political science, international relations, psychology. Things that we would generally tell people, no, don't study that, study something that you can walk into a job with, like management, right? But they were discounting these degrees, and I think they're still discounting and hiring a lot more people who study those types of areas, because they're able to think on a different level and are able to see the world through different sociology and those types of degrees. Those degrees actually get you a good job in a Fortune 500 company. If you do the research, you will understand what I'm saying. Should we be encouraging employers here because I mean, a lot of things that you can do in a management degree you can learn on the job. What you can't learn on the job really is the interaction that is necessary, the reading people and reading situations and how to react in those situations. Those are things that come with a different level of learning. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So employers, the study was showing that employers were saying, well, look, we need to hire a different type of candidate, and they found that they were getting greater results when they moved away from the MBAs and stuff for those types of candidates. So what do you think about that, and what in terms of what an employer should be thinking of as a qualified candidate for a position?
Thank you, Ayo. I'm glad you brought up that subject. And I think it points to how jobs are actually advertised and how candidates are actually recruited. Now, if you think about it, quite conventionally, employers, when they advertise a job, they would typically highlight the kind of qualification that would be commensurate for filling this particular post. But quite seldom would they have a kind of a list of other, what I call key supplementary or complementary skill sets, which is, as you just advanced, would include these soft skills. So what effectively happens is that let's say you're advertising a job for a mechanic, and this mechanic now has to interface with customers on a day-to-day basis, but you're saying that this person has to have like a particular City and Guilds certificate in this particular field, in auto mechanics, nothing more. So you get a string of applications from different candidates with all of this, with these qualifications. Employers examine the work experience, realize, okay, I want this individual, but then they bring in this individual and realize that this person cannot communicate. They can't form few words. They can't string together 2 words or 3 words to form a proper sentence. They're not emotionally intelligent. They don't like to work in teams. And I'm advancing based on your observation, the fact that I think employers need to have a more holistic profile in their advertising records and in their advertising methods.
And
So when you advertise a job, you give the holistic skills profile. But you see, that's also reflected in what I call a job analysis, because oftentimes when you're considering the best person, the best fit for a given job, you at the start of it, at the outset, you have to effectively assess all of the potential skill requirements for that job, not just the technical, but also the social cognitive that we mentioned, which are what we call soft skills in that job. And you list that in your ad so that it allows for that discrimination, proper discrimination of people who carry those skills to be effectively recruited and selected for those types of jobs. But we don't have employers who do that. And I think it's something that we have to change in that practice. Yeah. But I think let's talk about it on the supply side, though, because I think a lot of educational programs, like, again, going back to technical vocational programs, outside of having a highly technical or exclusive technical curriculum, they should also add subjects. They should add subjects to that curriculum that, again, form part and parcel of the what we call the soft skills inventory or repository that would be exceptional for that individual looking for a job, even though it is in auto mechanics, but it places them at above the rest, because this program can sell in this way, because we're not giving you just a technical qualification, but we're giving you the exposure to have these other supplemental skills that are going to put you at a competitive advantage in securing a job. So even the educational providers, those training providers, also have to consider how they reprogram and restructure their courses and subject offerings on that side.
Let's look at some of the comments from the audience. Sorry for ignoring you, audience, for so long. Sometimes we get into the conversation a little bit. So let me just scroll back up a bit and look at some of them. Angela, let me start with you. You've been commenting quite a bit. So you're saying, let us select national development areas based on market demands and scholarships in those areas. Yes. You can log that one away, Dwayne.
Sorry, you didn't get that one.
She was saying that we should select national development areas based on market demands and scholarship and provide scholarships in those areas. I believe she's trying to say.
Very true. Very true. I agree with that. Access to financing is one of the main obstacles for people exploring those areas. So that'll be great. Make it available.
Say that schools need to be discipline focused. Basically focus on schools for arts. You have schools for science and technology, schools for business studies, etc. And I do believe that this is something similar to what the government at this time is proposing with the new secondary school system. I don't know. Tell me, Dwayne. Dwayne disappear?
Yes, sorry, I'm here. Yes, so we're talking about the secondary school structure. So I'm working with the Ministry of Education with a strategic plan, which I've actually submitted last week, which is going to support that transformational effort. And just to give a bit of a background, because I think what has happened is that the Ministry of Education has advanced a proposal to do this, but I think what needs to happen, I think I made it very clear. I know I've made it very clear in the strategic plan that there needs to be a public educational and awareness program on what this actual transformational effort would look like. So let's talk about it a bit. So effectively, as you imagine, next year, 2023, we will no longer have a placement exam in the form of the common entrance exam, the Barbados Secondary Entrance Examination. And as a replacement of that, what the ministry will be doing is putting in place an exit, what we call the typical exit assessment. And that exit assessment is only going to assess the performance of students against what they consider to be these national performance standards. Now, that would not in any way place you at a given school, because we will no longer have that traditional system.
One quick question here.
Yes.
So is it going to be the case that none of our schools are going to be selective in nature?
Selective in the sense, you mean according to academic profile?
Yeah, according to academic performance, yeah.
Well, I'm not too familiar with that because it's still in its infancy stage. What I can tell you though, because of the way the system is going to work, a lot of our schools, like what we consider to be the so-called prestigious or less prestigious schools, a lot of that kind of narrative and thinking and practice will no longer prevail, because what effectively will happen is that you would have this two-tier secondary school system where there's going to be the first tier. Now, remember, you're leaving primary school, you're going to do an exit exam, not for purposes of placement, but only to see whether you meet performance standards. And then you are going to be zoned. Yes, it's going to be using a zoning formula, zoned into a secondary school, which we consider now to be, this is the first tier of a secondary school. This is referred to as a junior academy. A junior academy will take you from first form up to third form. Now, the thing about it, all schools, because it's going to be using kind of a zoning criteria, and that's be zoning according to the primary school that you occupy. Again, these are just very early proposals. These schools then are going to be rebalanced. Now, of course, the expectation is that all schools then would have to have equitable resources, not what obtained before or currently, but we would have the expectation. I know that's going to be a big thing, a big topic. Because for this to happen, the schools would then have to have equal resources from financial, human, technological resources, so that one cannot say that one school is quote unquote better placed or better equipped to deal with a certain category of students. So all schools will have to be equally placed as an equal playing field. Now, that would suggest then that these junior academies, which would be based on what we consider to be a zoning set of criteria, would then have a basic or standard curriculum, or curriculum that will carry from first to third form. Now, the second tier, I think this is where it gets interesting. You then leave, because then you're going through these different tiers, and you move down to what we call the Academies of Excellence. And this is where fourth form, and if you think about it, if under this existing structure, that is what we would consider to be upper secondary. So from fourth form, fifth, lower sixth, upper sixth, so 4 years, that's where the 4 years come from, you're going to be in these Academies of Excellence. And what do we mean by Academies of Excellence? Now, it would suggest that these schools of excellence will be in particular specialist areas like arts and sciences and commerce and information and technology, and there will be a technical vocational, you name it. So what effectively will happen is that depending on what is observed or assessed, because you will still have assessments, but those assessments would be for, again, determining whether students meet certain standards, and of course, exactly what kinds of areas or particular specialist groupings that student or that learner.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great, but I don't think I think we're still going to have selective schools. I believe. I mean,
there will be a kind of there still will be remnants of the existing structure, because this has to be a gradual move, you know. I think one of my concerns is that it probably might be too early to say that we can have this next year, because a lot would need to be done for this to happen. And I think that's where my strategic plan came in, because my strategic plan is saying because we have this transformation effort. But think about it. Think about the implications. Ayo hinted at it. One, the first implication is resource allocation. So if we're going to have this change in system, we have to be able to change our resource allocation mandates. It can't be the business as usual. So all schools have to have equitable access to these resources. And of course, let me just say, these resources include teachers. So the other implication then would be a kind of there's going to be a significant demand for retraining and reskilling teachers now to handle these new changes, and not just in the system, but even in the curriculum. Because you're moving away from the outdated methods of teaching in the system now to go to more experiential learning, project-based teaching, and problem-based learning. You know, all the key buzz terms that we hear about. There's a greater appetite now for competency-based assessments, especially at the secondary level. And it means that we need teachers, we need assessors. So you can see that it's going to also call for significant investment in training and development of those human resources. So if you're going to have, so it's almost like, you know, you have prerequisite activities that need to be in place before we can even realize a properly functioning two-tier academy system. So it is excellent on paper, and I believe. Let me just be biased a bit. I believe it can work.
Yeah.
But you know me, I'm very skeptical when it comes to implementation because of a prime minister.
Our implementation deficit.
Exactly. That was actually cited by a former prime minister in terms of what haunts the Caribbean. And I think we have to be very careful. So in my strategic plan that I developed, I was able to then to articulate what would be the step-by-step processes. And of course, I forgot, we cannot exclude our stakeholders. So this is where stakeholder consultation has to come in. So if I'm thinking about doing this for next year, it means that a lot of consultative sessions have to be happening now, not with teachers, with their unions, of course. You know, unions will make noise. What are the implications?
Don't forget parents.
Principals, parents, of course, parents. So there's an ecosystem that we know that is familiar within the education system, from parents right up to principals, trade unions. All of those people would have to be involved. Now, I always say that there's a delicate balance, though, between stakeholder consultation and action, because sometimes you can be caught up with so much stakeholder consultation and talk and dialogue, and then there's, you know, everybody wants to have their own perspectives prevail in this new system, and you can't please everyone. My grandmother always say you can't please everyone. So there has to be a kind of, I call it a threshold, that the Ministry of Education then needs to say, look, we've heard enough, we've consulted enough, now we have to act. Yeah, that's it. We have to implement, and that implemented set of solutions have to be again done collaboratively. It has to be evidence-based, all right, and it has to be phased. It has to be phased. Very important.
Yeah.
So I hope that we're excited about this new academy system. I mean, you will have resistance to change. Resistance to change is something that happens in any structure. And there will be people, as you know, there are teachers who will be resisting it because it will suggest some kind of perceived loss or threat to something that I'm accustomed to, or what we call the status quo. Parents themselves are who like to retain the fact that, you know, I want my child to be in a particular school, what we call a so-called bright school, usually be a vernacular, and what is a less bright school. A lot of, again, I think it requires a reform of mindset. And I know this sounds kind of cliche, but
no, it doesn't, because
it requires a reform of mindset.
Yeah, and I think that mindset will change over time. I don't think that initially mindset will change. There'll be a lot of pushback and so forth. But I do think that if we get the desired results, that the mindset will start to change. One of the results that should happen is where schools that don't normally get the type of resources that other schools get and the type of attention that some other schools get, they should start to see an improvement in those areas. And I think that is one of the results that I am excited for, because we do have some gems hidden away at some schools that we consider to be lower schools, but you know, they can't get ahead because of the environment and that kind of thing. Hopefully we start to get at one of the stakeholders that I would also like to see more involved in this are the students. We need to get buy-in from the students. We need to get the students on board with the understanding that, you know, they also have to really work a little harder and take advantage of the new system and make it work for them individually. So that's another thing that we need to think about.
Well, call me cynical, but the devil is always in the details, and I don't want us getting running along and thinking that 11 plus is over. That means that none of our schools will be selected. I cannot imagine that happening. So we'll see.
Terry, I'm with you on this. You know, I know Barbados well.
I suspect that none of these schools will still be very selective.
People will want to retain certain schools.
We'll see.
You know,
and it's a pretty simple thing to implement. You know, the schools in question can have their own exam. It's a very simple thing to implement. So we'll see what happens.
As I said, there will be teething problems as anything that is new that comes to the fore, for sure.
Yeah. But we want to see a day, and the idealists among us, and because, you know, idealists on certain issues, not idealists overall, but idealists on certain issues, we want to see a time where all of our schools are considered good schools. All our schools are considered great schools. and then people say all the time we're holding on to a system that was handed to us and then abandoned by the people who handed it to us. So
Totally. The UK still has
to a point, but you know, for the most part, they've abandoned.
They still do. Trust me.
Yeah. I mean, we've had I mean a string of perennial problems with the system that we have. I mean, I mean, you probably know my backstory. I was considered to be well, I was a low performer, in my school system, and you know, I was actually told that that I'm not going to make it to University of West Indies, that I am best placed at the Polytechnic, because the Polytechnics, I mean, that was a technical vocational facility, was actually used as a pigeonhole for students that they were considered to be less academically inclined. So that, as I said, it has to be a reform of mindset, a reform of thinking across the board, not just parents, but teachers, principals, gatekeepers of the educational system would need to kind of reimagine a new educational platform.
Mindsets change, but they change slowly.
But it's something that I totally forgot to mention, because if you're going to talk about education reform, the first thing that speaks to reform is legislation. And if you think about, we have an educational act, a National Education Act that is over 40 years of age. It has not been reformed. It has not been tweaked. And I think that for any first mover activity should be to review our legislation and see exactly where we can improve and then create the enabling environment for this change. Because we can't talk about changing this and that when we have a legislative framework that is a noose around our necks. So I always believe that legislative reform is a necessary, but always would be insufficient step for successful reform. So we need a change in legislation, but it is still insufficient for allowing us to realize these new changes and the benefits that would definitely or hopefully accrue, for sure.
Understand. I want to ask a question. I'll come back to the audience questions in a bit.
Yes.
Terry, I'm ignoring you, but I want to ask a question because I think I forgot when you spoke about legislation just now. You know, it reminded me that do we have to, or not we, but should government really be rethinking, because government can't employ everybody. That's the point I'm making. Right? So going back to the whole conversation on economic diversification, should we be rethinking the way we think about income and employment? We still have, I asked this question because somebody in the audience had said, you know, oh, we have to focus on getting people into a stable job and that kind of thing. Okay, I understand what that means in the Barbadian paradigm, in the Barbadian experience. You know, you leave school, you get a government job, or you get a job at a firm, and so forth. But shouldn't we be at this stage in the 21st century rethinking what we consider to be stable employment? And this is where the whole educational diversification and the economic diversification should meet, in my mind. Do you understand the point I'm making?
Yeah, absolutely. I have it clear. So what you're effectively saying is that there's one thing to be educated and to be operated in a job, but there's another thing to be in a job that we consider to be permanent, to be secured, to be safe. And I've actually worked with a colleague of mine, Dr. Lawrence Nurse, on a national youth policy. And this is not in any way going off on a tangent, but just to satisfy your question. The fact that within the national youth policy, one of the things that we've recognized is that there's this continuing rhetoric of we want more jobs for youth, but that has to change to a narrative that we want more decent, meaningful, and secure jobs.
Well, yes, people. That too, but but in addition to that, we want people earning. Do you understand? Because a lot of people who are jobs that they can earn don't necessarily. A lot of people who are considered to be unemployed are earning.
Yes. Yes. So what we consider, what you're considering would be persons who are underemployed. Yeah. So you're underemployed where you could really be working much longer for a lot more money, but you find yourself in a job because one, there probably aren't many options out there. So you decide to take this job as a part-time job. is paying, you're only working for like less than 20 hours a week, and you could really work more, but because of that, of the scarcity of jobs, or it could be the fact that you don't have sufficient skills that can put you in a place to obtain a more secure contract, because there are some jobs that are also tied based on their flexibility, in the sense that you would have somebody who has, let's say, what we consider to be a low skill occupant in a job, who's on a 1-year contract, or who's working on a seasonal contract because of that skill set, and that there are jobs that are actually present, but because the individual does not have that threshold, it doesn't meet the threshold, the skills threshold, to have a more secure contract, what we call a 3-year, 5, 10-year, or even on what I consider a 10-year contract, then that person is unable to have what we consider to be decent, long-standing employment. So that's also a risk factor that creeps in when you have, again, a lagging educational sector, or a sector where you have people who drop out of school quite early, and they don't have the sufficient skill sets to kind of secure those types of jobs that we consider to have some level of permanence. Yeah. So absolutely critical.
In addition to that, too, there's also a subset of people who basically will not be employed in any job, highly educated, and can't earn a living outside of the traditional employment market, basically outside of firms and outside of government. Do you think that we cater sufficiently to that segment of the market?
Can you repeat that segment again? I didn't get captured the first part.
Let's go back. Earlier we spoke about people making, earning, let's say, on the internet, earning through non-traditional means of employment. They're not employed per se. We have, let's say, the guy who, what's his name again, who, the RH guy, you know what I mean, who has a thriving internet business and so forth. We don't necessarily consider those people as business people per se, but they are, to my mind. Do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from.
So we need to pull those people, I think, into what we consider to be the traditional income making, whatever terminology you guys have for that, because they are income earners. They're doing this stuff. You understand, and that's the orange economy again. But when we consider the orange economy, we think about bands, we talk about the traditional things. But then there's this set of people that I find are being ignored a lot and not really being embraced.
And they're making tremendous amount of money, and they're making tremendous contributions to the economic state of the country. Exactly. And you're absolutely correct. I mean, it goes back to the point of how we create this whole narrative of economic diversification and what we mean by implementing economic diversification strategies. Because, as I said, we're not just looking at the same structures or the same sectors where we can find new jobs in those sectors, but we're also looking at the brand new on-tap markets, on-tap industries, and those types of jobs will fall into that space. But let me just say, because it's something that is adjacent to this point, the fact that there are a lot of people who are working in the informal sector or working in a formal enterprise, but working informally, that we are also not capturing in our radar or our surveillance, whether it be tax surveillance. I know people get scared when we talk about, the on-tap tax value or potential that we have in the informal sector. But think about it. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I've actually done some work for them on the informal sector. More than, I think, about 69% of their employed labor force is working informally in some form of employment. So, and that tells a lot, because when we do our estimates in terms of contributions of various industries to GDP, oftentimes we don't take into account the contributions, the direct and indirect contributions of those persons working in the informal employment.
Right.
And I know, I guess oftentimes when we think about informal employment, we think about low paid or low skill, and it's not always the case. You just mentioned something just now. There are people who are working in these novel, high skill jobs, but they're not formally recognized by the system. So they're still in informal employment because they're not recognized or registered. They're not paying the NIS. They're not placed under the surveillance of the tax system or whatever. But yet, because of the nature of the job, because they're generating revenue, because they're still paying, they're still spending money and so on, all of that is still being circulated within the economy. And we are not capturing that. So there's a big recognition, I imagine, that we need to place for the impact of the informal employment. I know, of course, when the conversation comes with informal employment, we still have to look at the negative side of it. The fact that this is also a sector where a lot of workers can be potentially be exploited because there's no social protection system in place. And think about it, those workers would have been adversely affected equally to those who were in the informal sector by the COVID-19 pandemic. But then the difference is that those persons then, when they were displaced from their informal employment, they didn't have access to Social Security. You following? They weren't able to tap into.
This is a fundamental.
There's always that precarious position when it comes to informal employment.
Not only lack of access to unemployment, but lack of access to pensions.
That's it. My gosh. Right. I think we can do another show on that because I've also done some work on pensions and the elderly. I've done a lot of work, I must tell you. So one report I did was looking at things like non-contributory pension and contributory pension and the perennial problem where an older person, he or she is moving to 65 or 67, but they're in a particular space where, and I'm going to talk about a non-contributory part. So they're in a space where they're not paying their NIS, so they're operating kind of informally, realize that, okay, I can't work, I'm 65, 67, I'm tired, let me just go for what we call the traditional non-contributory pension. But there's a process. You're not automatically entitled to get non-contributory pension. You have to go through a vetting process, a significant vetting process by the NIS to actually to even be considered as somebody who will be eligible for non-contributory pension. So that's something that we also have to think about. There are people who probably might be working and thinking about, I'm going to have a non-contributory pension. I can just go and apply for it. And they don't understand that it's a set of steps and it doesn't guarantee.
Not only is it a set of steps, but your cost of living and your standard of living, your quality of life, your custom spending X amount of dollars because of your earning capacity, even in the informal sector. But then when you come to apply for this non-contributory pension, there's a massive step down, right? And because of the nature of the pension is not going to be sufficient for you to look at that.
Correct. But and Terry, that's just the non-contributory side, because remember that would cover people who haven't been paying their NIS. But what about the contributory side? There are people who were contributing as long as they were employed. But here's the other problem. There's also a threshold, there's a limit. And you realize that when you leave your job, 65 or whatever, and you're now waiting on that to get that contributory pension, it is also
the government's policy is now to raise the threshold on the on insurable earnings from around 3,000 to I think 5,000, something like this, which hopefully will help. But yeah.
But you see but I always believe in getting to the root of the problem, where you have a lot of people who are out there, depending on pensions, but those pensions are not sufficient to sustain them. And retirement goes back to financial literacy.
Right.
It has to be a national agenda.
Right. This is
really improving.
This is really conversation goes back to education, but
yes, it goes back to education, improving their financial literacy.
Yeah, but on Aya's point about sector, what can government do, right? Of course, we know we need to have better education, but there's some serious issues that individuals working in the sector will necessarily face, particularly at this point in time when we're expecting inflation, and of course, individuals who are on pensions or on fixed income. And if you're on a fixed income and there's inflation, you know what that means. Your purchasing power is going to be undermined. what connections, what can governments do? And then we want to link it back to the whole policy or the whole discourse tonight, which is on education. How can we better inform these individuals what they need to plan for your retirement?
Okay. I mean, this is a multi-pronged approach. I mean, there's so many ways so many ways you have to tackle this. So one, as I said, you have to tackle it from the root problem. I think financial literacy education is a must. And I'm not saying that it has to be in the hands exclusively of government, but it also has to be shared with the private sector, with educational institutions. I believe a lot of workplaces that have these what we call private pension plans too, they need to do a lot of financial literacy training in their workforce so that people understand how do you plan, how do you save for your retirement, and take into account things like the cost of living and the increases in cost of living, how it can actually undercut your potential or your ability to survive after retirement. So that is one side of it. Now, for those who already have pensions and so forth, I mean, there's very limited fiscal space for government to consider how do I shore up that shortfall. One of my recommendations, especially for the elderly assessment I did for Barbados, was to consider how social services, yes, can work better, like the welfare department. And a lot of people don't know that you can't have a concurrent welfare check and having a pension at the same time. So there's also a problem in terms of how we look at who qualifies for these welfare checks, because if, for example, for those who can't get non-contributory pension, they're forced to go to welfare. And if you don't feel like going to welfare and you want to go back to the NIS to see if you can apply for NIS for this non-contributory, you also have a problem because they can tell you, well, you don't qualify. So I think social services especially would need to take up that shortfall and find a way in which that those people, and I'm not advocating a welfare state, can find a way, especially for our most vulnerable, a way that which they can kind of balance the revenue streams, that someone may have to have multiple sources from different social services in some way, or some centralized system, perhaps that's even better, where they can dispense funds that then fluctuate according to the cost of living or adjust to cost of living or inflationary increases. The other thing, though, I think is more sustainable is, I think I made a recommendation in the report, how do we re-engage older people who are over 65 in the economy again? Because you're over 65 does not mean that you can't find jobs, you can't go into entrepreneurial venture. So retraining our older people to also be able to start new jobs, self-employed, or to occupy spaces where they can contribute to the economy and still earn a living. So it supplements what they have.
I want to ask a question here because I feel like we're ignoring the audience a little bit. Audience, thank you for being here.
Please, let's have the audience.
It's because of you that this show happens, so we're not ignoring you. And thank you for your comments and your questions. I'm going to try to pay attention over the next half an hour.
Yes.
Well, we don't have a full half an hour, but over the next half an hour, because we start a little bit late, so we're going past the hour a little bit. Rosalind Carbon here, she's saying, thinking of EduTech 2000 and its outcomes. A weakness rested in buying into it by stakeholders, some of whom resisted because of its rushed process, lack of understanding of its purpose and long-term benefits, and teachers concerned about being displaced by the technology in the classroom. If the process back then was more inclusive, then perhaps we'd have been prepared for online instruction, now COVID times, lessons to be learned. Education reform is a serious business, overdue, and future focused, driven in the present. And we must be more idealist. There must be more idealistic rhetoric and narrative. Needs to be informed by best practices by the model being introduced. And I cannot agree with you more. I don't know if Wayne want to touch on that a bit.
I mean, she has hit the nail on the head. I mean, we've had a lot of failed attempts when it comes to reforming education. And I think the only good thing about failed attempts is the fact that they are accompanied with lessons to be learned, lessons that we can now consider today in terms of any reform activity, and to leverage to ensure that we don't repeat the same mistakes of the past. And as she said, the inclusive nature of or the absence perhaps of having edutech being inclusive and being guided by proper stakeholder consultation and involvement from all parties involved, one can learn about lessons of collaboration and stakeholder consultation very early in any reform activity. And I think the ministry will be well positioned to kind of remember and to borrow from those lessons learned, especially when it comes to consultation and collaboration.
Yes. And to Paul Bentham, he's saying that the consequences of not doing things differently are frightening. We have to run ahead with this. And he also said that the recent BSAC saw students from prestigious schools interacting with neuro-secondary schools, and the students can drive this change. So yeah, I think that buy-in from the students is necessary. Also, young people definitely are a little bit more free in our mindset. Us young people, we think a little bit more freely than the older folks, so we tend to get things done, right? Young people like me, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the mantra has to be no learner left behind.
Yeah.
And I would expand that to say no one left behind, whether it's learner, teacher, principal, union, rep, no one left behind in this whole reform exercise that we have on the table.
And Rachel Cheeseman is saying financial literacy is a must. Now, thank you for that comment, Rachel, because I feel extremely strong about this. Terry is my financial guru. I go to him whenever I have a financial question.
Oh, Lord.
He's always up in my business about what I should do with my money and what I shouldn't do with it.
Don't spend it. Don't spend it.
He like my father in that respect. Well, I listen because he knows what he's talking about. And, we all have to have some advice if we don't want to die poor when we're entrepreneurs. So thank you, Terry. Was it cussing you or thanking you at the same time?
Financial literacy, absolutely.
Cussing me
as early as primary school.
For my life, right? See you.
So let's talk about financial literacy a little bit and how, and Dwayne, and how that fits into the whole educational diversification and the economic diversification also. I mean, we touched on it a little bit just now when we were talking about the pension reform and pensions and so forth, and making sure that you're in the financial system and not operating on the outskirts and so forth. So let's talk a bit more about it though.
Okay, so when we started this conversation on financial literacy, we were, as you said, we were talking about older people who were retired from work and why it was so important. But when you think about it, you don't expend or dispense financial literacy when you're at 65. That has to be something that you have to be learning about. You have to be exposed to very early. So we're actually purporting that financial literacy starts as early as primary school, so that by the time you're 65, more than likely you've mastered that subject. But I mean, from a more holistic perspective, financial literacy is definitely a must for this new reform curriculum. And when you think about it, there are a lot of people out there, especially mechanics and those who are in the technical subjects, like, as I say, electricians, persons who work with their hands and so on. They're very good, technically proficient. But when it comes to managing money, and let me dare say, I'm not going to be just singling out those persons, but because there are a lot of persons like me who would be considered to be intelligentsia, who make very bad financial decisions, and Terry can tell you.
I'll tell you one thing sometimes, without crossing you, but crossing you. Sometimes I find with entrepreneurs, it's not a matter of not being able to manage their money, but because they can't necessarily afford a team to do this for them, to have they have to be on the ground every day at the same time, making sure they do the work, making sure they get new work and continue to turn over. So sometimes it's very easy to get caught up in the process of making money and continue to reinvest it without, all the other advice, get a pension plan, make sure, and these types of things, because
it can be overwhelming too.
It can be overwhelming.
So you need that, and so it goes back to the point of capacity. Exactly. So you have people who don't have, they're because they're trying to keep their business afloat.
Exactly.
They're spending money in different places. They don't have the capacity or the resources or the fiscal space to kind of invest in those types of resources to support them. An accountant, having somebody who has a financial management experience and knowledge that can guide them financially in the kinds of investment decisions and savings and debt management that they require. I mean, it is problematic. I mean, you have, when we talk about the agricultural sector, we talk about people who are farmers who are making a lot of money, but then they don't see where that money goes at the end of the day. Yeah. It's so unfortunate. So financial literacy is something that has to be for every occupation, whether you're quote unquote low skill, medium skill, or high skill. It is a necessary fix, or it should be a necessary fixture to any educational and training program. Because when we think about education, we usually would think about, post-secondary and secondary and primary, but even in the lifelong, what we consider to be lifelong education or continuous education, as it's formerly known, that we also need to embed in those continuous education programs where people use those programs to reskill and upskill, that there is that component of financial literacy. You can be an entrepreneur, as I said, as you advance the idea that, you're very technically proficient, but you're so focused on making money that you don't have sufficient knowledge, or you don't have the resources, whether human or otherwise, to help in guiding you in your management of your finances.
We also have a problem with trust in this country. So a lot of people don't want to get an accountant because they don't want nobody in the business, and these types of things. So these are things that we have to overcome as business people and so forth. Getting an accountant, having somebody do your books and that kind of thing is uber important.
Absolutely critical. Yeah.
Especially if you want to move your business forward. Yeah. I don't know. Terry, anything else you want to add before we move on?
No, go ahead. Move on.
You just want to be a wallflower tonight? This is your area, though, big man.
But I'm listening. I'm learning. Nothing's wrong with that. But yeah, there's a lot to be said on education and on financial literacy.
But I would hope that, in this whole conversation about education, a lot of our examples, of course, have been on the mainstream. And I think there needs to be a case, obviously, being mentioned about special education.
Yeah, I was just coming to that, though.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. I think
the need for special needs learning and the inclusion of deaf and so forth in the traditional learning sector and so forth. But you continue. You're going on the right way.
Right. So one of the proposals that I've highlighted in the strategic plan for the Ministry of Education is the fact that there is a lot of work for mainstream education, but when we think about curricular reform, we also have to take into account or accommodate that our students or learners with special needs need to be factored in. So when we talk about, for example, an alternative education program, it has to be a policy where those children whose special learning needs matter in the system, that those children are not forgotten. That I know we're talking about a two-tier system. So I would imagine that within that two-tier system, there's accommodation, whether that accommodation is by expanding facilities, special facilities. I've heard, I'm not sure, Ayo or Terry, you heard about the resurrecting of the Alma Paris Secondary School. I think there's a New Horizon Academy, which is, again, these are particular facilities, but I'm really calling for facilities to be expanded across the system so that these learners can access these facilities, but not just facilities, but they need to have access to the best teachers, the teachers that can engage in this holistic alternative programming that we call special education. So it's absolutely critical that they have the same access to these to resources as what we consider to be for mainstream students. So that's critical in this whole reform effort. Is, as I said, no one left behind.
Excellent. Yeah. So just generally though, Professor, before we call it, and I guess, how has
I thought we were going to 10 o'clock.
Well, I don't give Ayo any ideas. How has COVID generally affected education in your view?
I think it has affected education in so many ways, Terry. But I think, because for the sake of time, I can probably highlight my most conspicuous observation of it, and it is through the exposure of, or the shining of light on what we consider to be the digital inequalities, or what is known as the digital divide. And remember, we spoke a lot about free education, and Barbados has enjoyed, and Barbadians have enjoyed free education. But free doesn't necessarily mean access, because even though we have a free education system, what COVID-19 has shown is that there is that significant socioeconomic divide when it comes to access to things like simple devices. I mean, remember that transition to online, we were able to kind of observe significant challenges faced by many families at the lower end of the social stratosphere who don't have access to devices because of economic constraints or financial constraints. They didn't have access to Wi-Fi connectivity. They didn't have access to a lot of the learning tools that were critical to allow for that sustained learning experience for their children. You had a situation where you had 4 children sharing one tablet in a household. And I keep reminding people, yes, we have free education, but it doesn't mean that we have a kind of a wholesale access to education by the entire population. And I think, and of course, this would be a resultant recommendation, that there needs to be a significant assessment of these needs, socioeconomic, digital, and learning ICT related needs of households across the board. And of course, development of policies to support better access of children and other learners to these types of technologies and tools. So I think that will be one of my, I guess, most conspicuous observations, especially coming out of research that I've done with UNICEF, where we looked at the impact of COVID-19 on the educational system across 8 territories in the region, including Barbados.
So what are some of the other ways we can go about strengthening education as a common good in our system? So you've spoken to the need for more access to, well, deepening access via ICTs and what's not. But what are some of the other ways we can go about strengthening education?
Okay, I mean, I can belabor the point about the need for stakeholder consultation. I think a lot of changes and reforms in education cannot happen successfully without wholesale stakeholder consultation. We need to have people on the table being able to make contributions to what we want education to look like in Barbados. I think that's an important starting point. So, and there's a point that I've actually made quite early in this program, that outside of consultations, or apart from stakeholder consultation, we need to act. I think we have so much research out there. I know it's so quick for people to say, well, we need to do research.
A lot of it produced by Professor Devonish, by the way.
Yes, I'm a salesman, so I can sell my research. But the thing is that we need is what we do with the evidence.
Right.
How do we translate now the research data that we can see so clearly into sensible and tangible outputs, okay, that would generate the reforms that we want to see and the education system that we want to enjoy. So my next recommendation then would be, how do we translate that particular body of evidence that we already have amassed to turn into to policy, and not just policy, actual action. We want to see interventions. We want to see, so when they talk about a recommendation for a special education policy or green energy efficient facility, we want schools to be green. I want to see the action. I want to see the implementation. So we also have to strengthen our implementation mechanisms and systems when it comes to strategic planning, because we like to write things. I like to write things, but then taking those things off the paper and making them and bringing them to life so that you can see a tangible school with a renewable energy system, or you can see all schools having all functioning labs, computer labs, or fence-to-fence Wi-Fi connectivity and bandwidth. I want to see those things like you. So I think those are the kinds of recommendations that I would want to put.
I'm glad you say that, because I've said for some time that I really would like to see a situation where we have companies in Barbados who get a bulk of government's contracts, really be good corporate citizens and adopt schools, basically outfit schools with renewable energy and all these things, and keep these schools upgraded. And
Yes.
so forth. I really feel
provide zero-rate access to certain websites and so on, especially for students who don't have the means.
Government doesn't need to do it all. These people get contracts that are worth millions. And this is a way in which government can insist that they give back and take some of the load off of them, off the government. Rosaline Carbon is saying that the term being used there, educational diversification versus education reform, connotes more emphatically for me what we need in education. We speak of diversifying the economy, agriculture, etc. Why not do the same in and for education? Maybe that should be the new construct.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And one thing I would leave here on the table is that we like to place a lot of the blame or a lot of the responsibility on government or on the ministry. Let me dare say that this particular educational or economic diversification move that we are all talking about, this requires a whole of country approach. Yeah. It cannot alone fall on the hands or the shoulders of the ministry or government. The private sector, families, households, the third sector, the civil society organizations, the trade unions, all must come together, to reimagine and reinvent what we want in education or what we need in education.
Yep. Okay. Absolutely. So we spoke about, I think we spoke about almost everything here that we wanted to talk about tonight. So Dwayne, thank you so much. But I'm going to let you go on and say, make any statement that you want to make before we move on. And audience, let them go on and make any statements they want to make towards you're making your statement. So yeah.
I mean, I keep it short. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Terry. Oh, I'm going first? Okay. So again, I'm grateful to be on this show, and I'm hoping to come on more shows. So when you're ready, I'm here by myself, so I'm looking to get any offer. But to be, I mean, in summary though, I would like people to also understand the importance of education, that education is a bedrock. It is the linchpin of our society. And it has been contributing significantly to economic development, but it cannot remain as a laggard behind our economic diversification programs and strategies and moves. We have to bring education to the forefront. And when we talk about education, I mean, this is quite holistic construct. It doesn't just mean education as what a child does in school. I'm talking about in education from lifelong education, talking about informal education, talking about all the various channels of education. So it's not necessarily within the formal system, but even within the informal structures of our society. So I'm really advancing for Barbadians to also consider a reform of mindset, because we like to talk about reforming this and reforming that. But when we get it on the table, we are quite hesitant. It's almost like the meme I saw when this guy had asked this crowd of this audience, who wants change? And everybody raised their hand. But who wants to change?
Who wants change? Everybody raised their hand. Who wants to change is the
exactly. So change begins with you. Change begins here. And if you're going to see success in the kinds of reforms that we are going to be engaging, we have to begin in terms of our mindset, in terms of what we can see as possible. And even something that we consider to be even fearful of, that we're fearful of, because it is uncertain, it's in the dark, and we have no clue how to predict.
Agreed.
Yeah. So that's me.
Terry?
Thanks everybody.
Well, don't be like the dog who caught the ice cream truck, right? Because at that point, you don't know what the hell should I be doing with it, right? I just want to thank Professor Devonish for being here again. No strangers to the show, and we will definitely have you back. I'm sure I always probably penciling you in.
I'm already planning the other show, don't worry.
Exactly. I know Ayo.
Thank you.
You can't get away. Trust me. Trust me. Thanks, Ayo, for being here. Of course, it was a fantastic show. I think again, and I want to thank the audience for staying tuned. I think it was an interesting topic, and for staying with us to the end.
Yes. And thank you so much to both of you as we come to end. I also want to thank you, the audience on the stream, who took time to be here with us. And as I always say, I know you have choices. So thank you for choosing us. And those of you who are here now, remember to subscribe, hit that like button, turn on your notifications so you know when we're live. We're also live on YouTube each week. And if you enjoy this episode, please share the page, invite your friends to join us right here next Sunday. And of course, live long and prosper.
Thanks for watching Just Politics, Our Worldview. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube at JP, Our Worldview. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and smash the notification bell so you'll know when we upload new content. Join us next time.